Hello, we're gonna go over the racism form today. Let's pull that up. All right, the first question was, well, first of all, I had you read this document, Open Wide Our Hearts, the Enduring Call to Love, which was from the U.S. bishops in 2018, their pastoral letter against racism. So what was the purpose of the document? You should have answered, to address the destructive and persisting evil of racism that still infects our nation. What is racism? The definition here was the sin of holding one's own race or ethnicity as superior and judging persons of other races or ethnicities as inferior and unworthy of equal regard. Can racism exist in our hearts even if we do not will it to be there or realize that it's there? Unfortunately, yes, you all got that one. Racism can become blank when the cumulative effects of personal sins of racism have led to social structures of injustice and violence. And that answer was institutional. Some of you got tripped up by that and said personal. Remember back last semester, first semester, we talked about morality, we talked about sin, and all sin starts as personal. So just like the personal sin of Adam and Eve became institutional in that the whole human race has sin, any sin that starts out personal, which is all sin, like the personal racism of a person or prejudices of a personal nature, if it's repeated enough and becomes generational, it can be instituted in families, and then outside of that into social structures and the way corporations work, all that, so that it can become institutional or like a social sin. Okay, true or false, racism is no longer a major affliction of our society, but only found in the hearts of individuals who can be dismissed as ignorant or unenlightened. That's false. Sometimes we might think, well, I mean, it's just a few people who have this issue still in their hearts, and it's just because they haven't been educated or whatever. No, it's still a major affliction of our society that needs our attention. What did the U.S. bishops insist is needed then in order to reform our hearts, our institutions, society? They say conversion and justice. Conversion is at a personal level first, just like sin is. So every time we go to confession, it's this idea of conversion. We're doing, conversion means a radical reorientation. We're turning ourselves away from that sinful behavior and back towards God, okay? And so because racism is a sin, it's the same thing. We need conversion in our hearts to turn away from that sin of racism and back towards God and seeing all people through the justice of God, through the dignity that they have because of their humanity. And then through that personal conversion, we'll also see that wider conversion of societies and institutional. Justice, remember, is that virtue that means giving to others what they are due. So we give God glory because he's God. We respect one another because of our dignity, because we're all created by God. So conversion and justice are what the bishops say is needed. Okay. In your own words, you were supposed to explain how racism should be considered a life issue. This one threw a lot of people too, unfortunately. Some of you, I don't know if you were just kind of being lazy about it or what, but I don't know. You just said, well, because we're alive and people are alive, and then when you're, racist against someone, it's a life issue. No, life issue, guys. Like we were talking about in the beginning of the semester, the dignity of human life. What are atrocities that directly attack that dignity of human life? Things like abortion, like euthanasia, like the death penalty. All of those things are things that directly attack human life. And so some of you were right on. Let's see if I can find one where you guys were correct. Yeah, here it says racism and the injustice and harm that it causes is a direct attack on human life. It leads to other forms of life issues like poverty, imprisonment, death penalty. Someone else down here said abortion too. Yeah, so these things, they disproportionately affect people of color or minorities. And so that's an example of institutional racism in our nation. So that's what I was looking for with the life issue question. And if you put something else, you were way off. So just make sure that you're on the right page when it comes to the exam. Explain in your own words why it's necessary to listen to the stories of our brothers and sisters with an open heart. Most of you got this one. It's this idea of, in order to feel empathy, we need to hear where people are coming from. And even if we have predisposed notions about things or reasons why we think things are a certain way, well, we need to set those aside and actually listen to people's stories, hear from their perspective where they're coming from, so that we can have that conversion of heart and then act to bring forth a more just community when it comes to how we treat our brothers and sisters in Christ. Name one practical step you can take to combat racism in your own heart, your community, or society. Most of you came up with pretty good things here. I was just making sure that you were being pretty specific. So having an open heart to listen, stop with the prejudiced feelings when listening to those people. We need to demand action in every part of our world. Stop the trend of generational racism. That was a good example. Okay. Explain in your own words why Jesus's command to love our neighbors must go beyond simply live and let others be. Some of you really misread this question and thought that I was quoting Jesus as saying, live and let others be. Jesus did not say that. Jesus said, love your neighbors as yourself. So some of you were okay, but basically to actively love one another means we have to open our hearts, listen to their stories. This one's good. Help them when they're suffering, reach out, right? We can't just be like sort of you do you type people as Christians. Well, I'm just over here and you're over there, and as long as your problem doesn't affect me and my problem doesn't affect you, we're good. No, that's not what Jesus calls us to. He calls us to a radical command of loving our neighbors, which means we need to sometimes be challenged and feel uncomfortable in going beyond ourselves so that we can help those around us. Okay, then I had you watch a video that kind of highlighted the main points of this document, Open Wide Our Hearts by the Bishops. And you should have chose 5 of these things that were the main topics. And I can't read, for some reason, it's irritating me. I can't read the whole thing right here for some reason. But this is what they started with. The sons and daughters of the Catholic Church are all in one family. I think it said something like that. This one, racism in the U.S. has often taken it's become institutional. Is that one? Racism is a life issue, like we were just talking about. Catholics and all people of goodwill are called to combat this affliction of racism. And justice requires restoring right relationships. So there's this reconciliation that needs to happen, which reconciliation goes beyond just apologies. Reconciliation is to actually make it right. So make the systems right, make all of that work. And also to be honest about, our history and where we've failed as a nation and as individuals. All right, the next part, you were supposed to read particular stories from the document. The first one is about the Native American experience. And then some of you said you couldn't find the questions and that you read the whole thing. Well, it was in the first sentence, so that makes me question whether you read the whole thing. It says, read about the Native American experience below and name one prominent historical figure listed who helped the cause of, that should have been equality for Native Americans, and explain their specific role in the Native American experience. So I explained right there what you were supposed to do. There were several people you could have listed, Junipero Serra, Pope John Paul II, Anselm Weber, all those people. But you needed to do, some of you named the person, but then you didn't go on to tell me what they actually did. So you needed to do both of those things. Like here it says, Junipero Serra frequently clashed with civil authorities because he challenged their treatment of the Native people. Simple as that. You just needed to give you a little explanation. I forgot to give you the code word up higher. So the code word is love, L-O-V-E. So when we were talking about Jesus' command to love one another, you can either just text me the word love through Remind in a PM, or you can write a fuller sentence about how that virtue of charity or that virtue of love is related to our call to end racism. Okay, the next one was about the African American experience, and it says right here, in your own words, describe chattel slavery. So you were supposed to read it, and then let's see. This one's pretty good. Chattel slavery is a cruel and brutal type of slavery. Many of the slaves under this type were put under extreme circumstances, expected. They were beaten, raped, worked to death, things like that. But some of you also put that it was the form of slavery where human beings were treated as property. Okay, that was an important piece to put in there as well. And that they were bought and sold, and that those, even like the children, it was generational. So even any children born of the slaves that someone owned also became their property. Okay, and then the last one was reading about the Hispanic experience. And here's the question. How many documented cases of lynchings for Hispanics were recorded in the US? That answer was 550. And then some of you also put in the case that it's probably double that, just because most of them were undocumented, or a lot of them were undocumented. So that's that on racism. See you in the next video. Bye.